Thank you guys so much. Got a crowd today. Thank you all so much for coming. I know I'm really excited about this conversation. I know we have a few people here who are very excited. Can each of you guys just go down the row, tell me kind of a little bit about yourself and how you got involved with the Women's March?
Sure. My name's Breanne Butler. I'm a Detroit native. I moved to New York about 7 years ago, and I'm a chef. So my life's a lot different since the march. So a little bit of background. I used to work at Facebook as their pastry chef, and yes, they have an in-house pastry chef. So I did that for a couple years, and then I started my own business, and I got the magical call last April to do cookies for one of Hillary Clinton's fundraisers. So, you know, having your own business, you're in your own zone, you're doing everything from your own taxes to deliveries to rolling out cookie dough till 3 a.m. And I wasn't really paying attention to what was happening around me. And I was at that fundraiser, and it just hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, I need to be paying attention right now. So I started to get more involved, and I was at Javits that night. We thought we would have the first female president, and obviously the night took a very different turn.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, one of the worst nights ever. So I was actually on the train home, and I had to get off at 42nd Street to throw up, and there was 3 other women doing the same thing. So we just hugged around a trash can and cried. And for me, that was my moment of, okay, I'm crying now, but what can I do? Like, I can't just sit around for the next 4 years. And so I went on Facebook, and I saw this post, and there was only a couple hundred people that had signed up at that point. And so I just messaged Bob Bland, who was the person that had the post, and I was just like, hey, do you need help with this? And she's like, oh, I saw you worked at Facebook. Can you start making Facebook pages for all of the states to mobilize to DC? And I'm like, sure. So I started doing that. She made me a host of the event, and I thought my Facebook was gonna break. Like, it was just messages by the hundreds. And so within 24 hours, there was people from all over the world reaching out, people from Australia saying, please don't change the date because we already bought 10 plane tickets. So for me, I mean, at that point, it was no turning back. And it's been an incredible ride ever since. And I can't believe our 6-month anniversary is just, what is it, next week? What day is it? A couple weeks? Yeah, so here we are.
Wow. Really awesome. Emma, what about you?
So my name is Emma Collum, and I am a CUNY Law alum, so right over the water. And I have been part of politics, working with legislatures, working with unions, working for not-for-profits. I am currently a general counsel, and much like Breanne, this past election happened, and I woke up the next day, and I thought that someone had died. So, like any normal person, I thought, well, what do I do? And I figured, well, I'm gonna skip work and go get margaritas. And instead, I saw a post from who I now know was Bob Bland asking for volunteers. So as a general counsel, I offered my legal services. And she said, are you living in Florida? And I said, I am. And she said, do you want to run Florida? And I said, yeah. And then thought I should have gotten the margaritas. But ended up leading 27,000 Floridians up to DC. It was pretty incredible, and along the way, met these 2 fantastic women and was asked to join the national team in order to help lead all 50 of the states up to DC. Since then, Women's March Florida has become a 501c3. I still serve as a co-field director on the Women's March national team, and I'm also running for office as state representative for Florida. And I saw my husband like 6 months ago. He's fine. Everything's fine. It's fine.
So you have like a ton of time to chill.
Yeah, no, we're fine. Everything, not busy at all.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm Mrinalini Chakraborty. I don't expect any of you to be able to say my name. So my story is kind of probably similar to a lot of folks like myself who are immigrants to this country. I'm from India, from Kolkata in India. I came to this country 8 years ago to go to college and have stayed here, worked here. My entire life is here, even though my family is back home. But my husband and I, we're both immigrants, and we've made a life for us here. I have been politically active pretty much all my life. I had an opinion about everything growing up, much to the dismay of my parents. And I got my, you could say, like, entry into activism when I was 15 or 16, working for sex workers' rights and their children's rights in India, in one of the most notorious red light districts in South Asia. Fast forward back, being a student here, it's a lot sort of figuring out like how to really find your place, because not only is there a huge cultural difference, it's really difficult when trying to explain to people just how many steps, how many aspects go into sort of, figuring out your footing in a foreign country. Last year, I had been organizing protests and marches against Donald Trump. I live in Chicago, by the way, and I'm a doctoral student there at University of Illinois in Chicago, and we mounted probably one of the largest anti-Trump protests last March. Probably one of the many reasons he hates Chicago so much, because he was coming there to talk and we were not having any of that. So same as these ladies, November 8th was sort of like a huge shock to my system. And I knew exactly what would happen if this current administration it came into power, because I knew it's people like me, and those who are far more vulnerable and marginalized like me, we would be the first ones. We would be the expendables, right? And I knew that I had to do something. And very similar to Emma's story, found Bob's post. And then I was like, I need to do something. Give me an occupation. Like, I have to do something. And they were like, I think it was Breanne, like, do you want to start the Illinois chapter? I'm like, I don't know what that means, but yes. So started the Illinois chapter, started organizing buses, and soon it just went from like one bus to over, I believe at the end of it, we sent over 155 buses from Illinois itself. Joined the national team within the first few weeks of the march planning, when they realized just how large this was becoming. Emma and I together handled sort of all 50 state coordination and sent over 1.2 million people to DC. So it was an incredible journey, and we continued to keep the fight on. As a side note, if you guys ever need to find parking spots in DC, just ask me. I know ones that they will not even advertise. So, yeah.
Oh, well, so when I was covering the Women's March, in its conception in November as an editor at HuffPost, I know really secondhand as a journalist how there was a lot of kind of trials and tribulations of the planning process. I mean, you guys had a Herculean task ahead of you, and wow, was it a success? But I would really like to hear, some of the challenges and maybe some of the better points that happened between November and January. Breanne, you want to start?
Sure. I mean, the biggest challenge for us was communication. I know myself, I would get up around like 5 or 6 a.m. and it would immediately start with conference calls. And I would be on the phone till 2 a.m. every day, because most people would be working on the march either before or after their shift, and especially dealing with the West Coast, people would be awake until 11 p.m. Pacific time, which translated to 2 a.m. my time. And I'd just start to close my eyes, and then my phone would be ringing, and it would be Europe, like, hey, good morning, like, just had 2 flat whites. And so it was just constant communication. At the same time, the fact that we were able to use social media and tools like that to organize a march like this in such a short amount of time. I mean, there's been massive global mobilizations before, but to do what we did in the amount of time with the amount of people we had. Like, there was no wizard behind the curtain. Like, it was everyday people like us making it happen. So it was challenging, and there were tears, and there were high points, there were hugs. But I think the big point for me was at 8 a.m., the day of the march, somebody pulled me aside and they were like, you have to see this. And it was behind the backstage area and where the hill was. And you looked and you just saw this like sea of pink coming down the hill. And it was seriously like that scene in The Lion King with the stampede of animals. But they were all wearing pink pussy hats, and it was crazy. And that was the moment where you're just like, oh my God, and you're looking at Facebook and you're seeing the Facebook lives of the march in Tokyo and Auckland and Nova Scotia, and you're just like, this happened. Like, everyday people stepped up and made this happen.
That's so awesome. I remember I was covering the inauguration that Friday, and my colleagues and I got up at like 4:30 in the morning. It's dark out, and we're exhausted. And you can tell how fragile we were because we saw a boy with his girlfriend, and they were both wearing pink pussy hats, and 3 of us started crying. We were like, okay, it's all worth it. It's gonna be okay. But yeah, I think that, it was such a historic day, and I think the planning process, as you said, was, it was riddled with some issues. What was it like, Emma, to wake up that day and realize that, at the end of that day and realize, wow, this was historic, and I helped to create it?
So I think it's important to note, I had said before, I woke up, like many of you, the day after the election feeling as though somebody had died. But to ignore the movements that have come before us, to ignore those communities that have been suffering, who have been systemically oppressed, who have been fighting for so very long, is to do a disservice to what this march stands for. So for me, I woke up at 2:30 a.m., I put on Hamilton, I did a little shimmy, and I got out there, and when I saw, much like Breanne says, when I saw what seemed like looking over the highway when you see the wavering lines, and it was just pink, but then you saw underneath those lines, and you saw communities, and you saw LGBTQIA communities, and you saw people of color communities, and you saw husbands there with their wives, fathers there with their daughters. You just saw the plethora that make up this community that felt so disenfranchised, so hated through this really divisive rhetoric through this cycle. I started to cry. And my grandfather said he saw me on C-SPAN crying like a baby on stage, and it was one of the most worthwhile moments I've ever had in my life. And it's what continues to make me want to pursue this path, pursue this activism, and do it with these women and do it with this group.
So, Mrinalini, I think that, I know that this is 6-month anniversary is coming up. Tell me what's happening with the Women's March now. I know that there's been, a Day Without a Woman strike, and I know upcoming is the next NRA protest. You want to tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so, we have, right after the march, even though we were absolutely exhausted, all I wanted to do was sleep, but there was no sleep. The day after, January 21st, the day after that, we knew that our real work begins now. And there were 30,000, 40,000 people messaging us being like, what next? What next? And we're like, just hold on a second. Like, let us breathe for a minute. So we did the 10 action in a 100-day campaign, which was a massive success, where we basically took all of our unity principles and tried our best to translate them into concrete actions, keeping the momentum going, but also giving these 5-6 million people around the world, the platform, the inspiration to keep going. And we knew that we had to take the energy from the march and translate them into concrete stuff. So we've continued with actions. At the moment, as you mentioned, we are marching on the NRA. it's July 14th, 9 a.m., Fairfax, Virginia. And this is primarily in response to this really, if you ask me, a disgusting and violence-inciting ad that the NRA put out recently. I don't know, I'm hoping most of you have seen it, which not only endangers marginalized and already vulnerable communities that, like black and brown people, to be frank, who have suffered tremendously at the in terms of state violence as well as like gun violence in their communities, but it also villainizes protesters, the peaceful resistance, terming us as the violent left. And basically, when they say that NRA members have to respond with the clenched fist of truth, what they're actually asking subliminally is asking them to take up arms against us who are non-violently resisting and trying to fight every piece of horrible legislation that this administration is trying to shove down our throats. So our brave co-president and co-chair, Tamika Mallory, wrote a very simple and concise letter to the NRA asking for three demands, making three demands. Number one, that this ad be removed. Number two, that they apologize for putting out such hateful propaganda that incites violence. And number three, that they acknowledge that the NRA makes a big deal about being a civil rights organization, but they have been almost deafeningly silent when it comes to protecting the Second Amendment rights of black and brown folks. Specifically, a recent example in our over the last year has been the case, the murder of Philando Castile, where he was legally carrying a firearm and was shot down by the police officer Jeronimo Yanez, who was acquitted just a few weeks ago, as you guys know, of all charges. So we know that we are taking on a big, this is not something we take lightly. But at the same time, we were also very clear when we started the Women's March that this is not a feel-good movement. Lives are at stake. Actual tangible damage has been done to people's lives. And, we made a commitment to put our bodies on the line, if need be, to keep pushing this administration to truly be an administration that takes care of all Americans, not just some Americans.
And I guess I would piggyback on that with the question of this work is exhausting and it's important, and how do you keep the momentum going when, like you said, there's kind of this everyday assault on women's rights, and you three are at the forefront?
I mean, they're making it pretty easy to keep the momentum going, let's be honest. It hasn't been difficult to make people's inner fire light up and say, I want to do something. The biggest thing is, what can you do? And, we get this question all the time. And what's going to change the dialogue, what's going to change the course of how things have been and how things are going to be, is the everyday people, all of you in this room, stepping up. What are you good at? How can you apply it to political activism? Like me, I'm a chef. There's certain things, whether it's delegating or working well under pressure, that I excelled at in my career, so I can apply that to political activism. And people have different skill sets, and if you're able to work in parallel, and even if it's just 15 minutes, if you're great at making a spreadsheet, that takes me 2 hours to make a spreadsheet, but some people can whip it out like nobody's business. So there's a lot of ways for everybody to contribute.
And that was really my last question is, volunteering is so important. We see it every day. We see it with the Women's March. Emma, you want to tell me a little bit about why you think volunteering is so important? And secondly, for people in the audience today, people watching on the live stream, how would you suggest to someone who maybe wants to get involved with their own communities and at a grassroots level, get involved?
So one of the things that I've learned from being Women's March co-field director as well as the executive director of Florida Women's March is that with the millions of things that are coming down the pipeline at us every day, it's easy to get exhausted and depressed and just want to curl up into the ball. But if you do that, that's 1 minute, that's 15 minutes, that's one day wasted that you could have been volunteering. You could have been calling or writing a letter to your senators. You could have been doing a sit-in like so many brave individuals did in Washington, D.C. for healthcare. Or you could be running for office. So what I want to say is take that anger, take that sadness, and foray it into activism, foray it into volunteerism. If you want to get involved and you have 5 minutes, write a letter, call your senator. There's so much information out there for you to do it. If you have 18 months, run for office. Because I'm going to tell you right now, there can be change. We're making change right now. We're making tangible change. And it's going to come from people like all of you who are sitting here actively engaged and ready to get out there. And it's going to come from putting the right people in office and telling the people that are in office that you don't feel like currently embody your values to maybe get out. But I think in order to volunteer, there's so many great groups, including the Women's March, including Indivisible, including NOW, including Planned Parenthood, including ACLU. They want your boots on the ground. You just have to pick up the phone and call.
Great. Well, I think we can throw it out to the audience, see if anyone has a question.
Hi. Thank you for being here, and thank you for organizing the event. I was down in the Women's March, and I thought it was really inspiring. I just wanted to know, you were speaking a little about what activists can do, but you were also touching on how you saw young people with their families there. And I was wondering what advice you would give to someone who's a little bit younger to try to get them to understand this activism and to motivate them in sort of their circles and what they can do to make this change.
Well, I mean, it starts in your environment, right? So for a lot of young people, that's school. And it's really cool because this dialogue's happening right now. And I've been at several schools where young people are organizing different activist circles or even talking about like how they can protect their Muslim brothers or sisters in the hallways if they're getting bullied, or how to take a stand against LGBTQIA students that are getting bullied or not being accepted. And it starts there. And it's really good because we're finally talking about it. And what's so powerful about Women's March is not just creating political change, but also cultural and social change. And that does come with the youth. And it's encouraging because even globally, an 11-year-old organized our march in Scotland. Yeah, exactly, it's amazing. But it's also mixed with the older generation of feminists. Like we had women, there was one woman that marched in DC in her wheelchair, and she was like, I marched for my right to vote. I marched when Roe v. Wade passed, and I'm marching with you all now, and I'll keep marching. And that's the mentality we have to have. And the youth is the future. I might not see an end result or everything resolved in my lifetime. It's about passing that on and making sure that the youth continues to fight, but it starts in their environment.
I'd like to add something quickly to you, saying that one thing that I, faced even as a younger person is that a lot of times we don't know exactly where to plug in because there are like these older folks who are sort of, like the gateway to doing things. I'm just gonna come out here and tell you, don't ask for permission, just do it. You have better ideas than most older folks that I have met. And in every single circle that I've been in, young people are, not only are they our future, but they're also our present. And you are the people who are gonna bring about transformative change. If somebody is causing a barrier to, whatever it is that your hopes and ambitions and dreams are, don't listen, just like go do your own thing. Don't ask for permission.
That's a great answer. Another question?
Hi, thanks for being here, ladies, and thank you so much for all the work that you've done. It really means a lot to me personally. I'm sure all of us here.
Thank you.
I was wondering, I find it's so easy to have good intentions and that you want to do something, but I have an issue with organizing. And you guys have planned things nationally, so I'm wondering if you have any advice on organizing something local.
Sure. So I think that's an awesome question because one of the things I was sort of laughing about thinking when you asked about challenges for the march, porta potties. It does. In order to put off something like this, somebody has to think of the logistics, has to think of the basic, has to think of the structure that is going to withhold this tremendous action that I know you personally are going to be putting on after this. So what I would suggest is find what you're passionate about, signify it, find if there's a group that's already doing it. Learn from that group. Go call that group. Go to their meetings. If no one's doing it, pick up a book on organizing in the library. I know there's libraries, it's crazy. But pick up a book on organizing in the library, go online and put out, here's the beauty of Facebook. It's a quick way to get people engaged really quickly. Call a meeting at a Starbucks and get people thinking. You might not know how to make spreadsheets, but what you might know how to do is identify that person in the group who can make the spreadsheets like you wouldn't believe, and you know the other person who is friends with all of the organizers in the group. And through talking, through communication, through having that dialogue, you're going to find that you very quickly assembled around you a team that's going to do tremendous things.
And one of the key things about organizing, really, I mean, this is not it's a kind of controversial answer, but it's learning how to organize yourself out of the organizing. So delegate. It might seem like, that's like a lazy person's thing, but no, when you have to put on something as massive as we did, you have to grow very fast. You have to be quick on your feet. But at the same time, you have to realize when to sort of give up to other talented folks. And you have to trust that people will, the team that you're assembling around you will, do what's necessary. You'll make mistakes, you'll learn from them. Some porta potties are not gonna work. It's gonna happen. But hey, it's all a learning curve and you'll get there.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. It's such an honor. And as a young person, thank you for organizing this great event. So my question is, how did it feel knowing that not only that the Women's March in America was huge, but knowing that other countries in the world took a huge part of it as well?
So as the leader of the global arm of Women's March, it was very obvious and apparent that this march that happened on January 21st was not about one person. It wasn't about one administration happening. He might have lit the match on the gunpowder all the other countries had been sitting on, but it goes beyond that. And it goes to show that there's so many communities, particularly women, are one of the most marginalized communities around the world. And to hear the reasons why they were marching, to see the signs in Japanese, and to hear that women in South America were marching for gender violence. It's still a huge problem. No one's talking about it enough. In Ethiopia, clean water is still a huge problem, and it's directly impacting education. Girls are dropping out of school when they start their periods because they can't bathe themselves and they're too embarrassed to go back to school, and they just never go back. In Tokyo, the women there are resisting because in their culture, it's common to just get married and be a submissive wife and have kids and this and that. And the Japanese women are taking a stand and being like, you know what? No, I want to educate myself. I want to grow myself before I have a family. And so you're seeing this resistance happening. And a lot of it is just that domino effect of starting that. And when somebody speaks up, it's amazing how many people are like, I've been feeling like that too, and I just was too scared to say something, or I didn't know other people felt that way as well. And even in red states, we're seeing incredible groups coming together, and they're like, I thought I was the only Democrat on my block, and like it's bringing people together. But a lot of that is just speaking up and taking a stand, and it does create a ripple effect.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you.
This
Thank you
was
so
such
much
a
for
wonderful
having us.
conversation.